About a decade ago, my company sent me to India to run an IT project for a couple of months. I was based in Mumbai, but occasionally I needed to travel to offices in other cities. Typically I would take the paid flight, but on this occasion I decided it might be fun to try out the 15-hour train journey. I thought it would be a great way to take in the sights of rural India, meet some local people and have a little me time along the way. I arrived at Mumbai station nice and early. It's an old colonial building of some grandeur, so I wanted to take a look around. It's also one of the busiest places on the planet, so I made sure I had plenty of time to get my ticket and board the train. Here's where things took a turn for the worse. My assistant hadn't booked me into first class. I don't want to sound like a snob, but there's a big difference between first and other classes on these trains. I had my laptop and other valuables, and being in a standard class wasn't going to be safe if I wanted to sleep during the 15-hour journey. My laptop wasn't going to matter anyway, as while I was walking to the train a woman barged into me running the other direction. My laptop took a pretty bad knock falling out of my bag, and the screen was completely smashed to pieces. The woman didn't stop and apologize. She simply looked back with no expression on her face and continued briskly walking away. If that wasn't enough, the train was super crowded, and the only water they had was from a jug, which I wasn't keen on drinking. If you've not been to India before, then you should know water can be one of the most dangerous things to consume, so drinking only bottled water is the best way to stay safe. So I sat there on my bunk seat for a few hours, nursing my only bottle of water, trying to enjoy the view. At one stop around sunset, a lot of people got off, and I was hopeful that I'd get a bunk area to myself when a middle-aged woman came and sat opposite me. To my shock, it was the woman who had knocked into me earlier. I was going to mention it when I felt overwhelmed not to. I hadn't noticed at first, but she seemed flustered, panicked, maybe unwell, I wasn't sure. Because of my upbringing, I felt obliged to ask if she was okay. "Ma'am, are you alright?" I asked, giving a cheesy thumbs up in case she didn't understand. She looked at me and stared for what felt like minutes. Her stare went deep into my soul, and I felt a chill even though the temperature was super high. "Are you okay?" I asked again. After a pause she said, "You can help me?" "Sure," I said. "How?" "They come for me," she said. "Don't let them take me, please." "Who is coming for you?" I asked. She only responded with the word "men." I explained that I would keep a lookout and see if anyone was coming this way. I didn't know what I could do, and the idea of being in rural India on a train trying to defend a random woman was already filling me with dread. Some time passed. It felt like hours, but looking back it was probably only 20 minutes or so. I started to drift off, thinking if anyone was on this train searching for her, they would have reached us by now. Suddenly I was awoken by a large bang. The door to the carriage had been viscously swung open. Sitting on my bunk, I couldn't see who it was, but I realized it was quiet now. Deathly quiet. My blood was running cold. I looked at the woman. She was crying with her face looking out the dark window into the nothingness of the countryside. "Is that them?" I asked, and she nodded softly. I could hear the loud boot-clad footsteps of the men at the other end of the carriage, their voices stern and demanding, more aggressive than I have ever heard anyone in India speak. Although my body didn't want to let me out of my seat, it was like I was glued onto it due to fear. I stood up with all my might and peered round the bunks. I suddenly felt deathly cold, freezing almost as I looked around and realized there was nobody in the carriage. Not a soul. People couldn't be simply sleeping, they would have awoken with the noise the men were making. Their voices were enough to swell fear in the guts of anyone. We hadn't stopped, so it made no sense where all the other passengers had gone. In the darkened carriage I could see the two men in what looked like police or military uniforms. Their clothes were thick like wool, and they had helmets on like British policemen. The men were walking up slowly, checking each bunk area. It looked like they were talking to people demanding tickets or paperwork, but I couldn't find anyone else there. The men were clearly getting more irate as they couldn't find what or who they were looking for. Nothing good was about to happen. I could see the anger on their faces, and it filled me with dread. The woman spoke again. "Help me. I must get away. They will take me." I was stunned in fear. I don't think I even replied. She let out a large weeping cry, deathly loud, which clearly alerted the men. As the footsteps got closer, I sat back down, head in my hands. I was devastated as I knew I could do nothing to protect this woman. A few minutes passed and the footsteps drew closer and closer, becoming louder and louder. As I was certain they would arrive any second, I heard a loud knock. This must be them, I thought, but I looked up to see a food vendor pushing a cart asking if I wanted to buy anything. I looked around. The woman was gone and the carriage was filled with life again. Puzzled and confused, I asked the man if he saw the woman or the police, and he shook his head. I'm not sure if he understood or not, so I tried to describe, but he still denied anyone was there. To my surprise, it didn't even look like anyone had been sat opposite me at all. I checked my watch to ensure it was still there in case I'd been asleep and dreamt the whole thing. I was shocked to see that only about 10 minutes had passed since we left the last station. How could that be? What happened felt like hours. After we arrived in Delhi, it took me a few days to comprehend what had happened. It wasn't that it scared me as such, but it didn't seem normal. Something different, unusual had happened to me, and I needed to think about it for some time before doing anything or talking to anyone. In the end, I didn't go to the police. I was convinced what I saw hadn't happened, well, not at that time. I did do some research a few weeks later and found out that women from some parts of India back in colonial times would try to escape from forced labor or worse, and often use the trains to escape. Have I seen something from the past? Or had I just imagined the whole thing? Thanks for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe.